She slapped him right there in the first-class cabin, just because he was black and wearing a hoodie. No questions, no hesitation. Just the crack of her hand against his cheek and the sound of 100 people pretending they didn't see it. That's how this flight began, not with a welcome, not with service, but with judgment. A 15-year-old boy boarded quietly with his caretaker, holding a valid first-class ticket, and within minutes, he became a target. Not because he broke a rule, not because he made a scene, but because of the way he looked. And what's worse, no one stood up. Not when she questioned him twice. Not when she accused him of lying. Not even when her hand came down like he didn't deserve to exist in that seat. Everyone looked away, until they couldn't. Because 3 rows behind, someone else was watching. And what happened next? It flipped the entire plane upside down. But I won't spoil it yet. You'll need to see for yourself what silence cost, and what truth exposed. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. And if this story grips you, hit like, subscribe, and stay with us, because what happened in C2C is just the beginning. Flight 397 to Seattle had just begun boarding. The air in the jet bridge was still, interrupted only by the soft roll of carry-ons and the clipped voices of flight attendants checking names and zone groups. A soft classical tune played inside the cabin, blending with the hush of first-class passengers already seated and sipping drinks in tall glasses. Polished shoes, tailored jackets, designer purses. This was the curated world of comfort 30,000 feet in the sky. Then came Jalen, 15 years old. Tall for his age, but soft-featured. He wore a clean navy hoodie, loose khakis, and sneakers with the soles still bright white. His steps were quiet, purposeful. In his hand, a boarding pass folded once, then unfolded and checked again. Behind him was Lorna, his longtime caretaker, whose worn brown bag swung over one shoulder. Her curls were tucked back into a loose bun, her floral blouse neat but simple. She smiled at him, just a little, as they crossed the threshold into the cabin. "Almost there," she whispered, and gave his arm a light squeeze. Jalen gave a small nod, eyes scanning the rows ahead. Row 2, seats A and C. Their names were on the manifest. Their reservations were confirmed. The seats, leather, reclinable, and pristine, waited. But something else waited too. They stepped forward as instructed. And something shifted. Not the lights, not the temperature, but the air itself. It happened the moment Jalen stepped into view. A subtle hush. A long glance from a man already seated in 3A. The quick up and down look from a woman standing near the galley in a black pantsuit. Nothing loud, nothing obvious, but not invisible either. Lorna saw it. Jalen felt it. A couple across the aisle whispered. The man leaning in and saying under his breath, they must have boarded the wrong cabin. The woman beside him looked up briefly, saw Jalen settle into 2C, then looked away without a word. No one corrected him. No one said a thing. The silence said enough. Jalen sat slowly, trying not to draw attention. He placed his backpack at his feet, adjusted his seatbelt, and looked straight ahead. His fingers hovered over the screen of his phone, not typing anything, just holding it. Lorna placed her purse under her seat and sat beside him, eyes calm, lips tight. She had seen this play out before. Different cities, different restaurants. Now 35,000 feet above any neighborhood lines. The same lines still followed them. A few rows up, a man in a blue blazer cleared his throat, leaned across to his wife, and asked, "You think they upgraded him?" She shrugged. Maybe they won something. Some charity thing. Her voice wasn't cruel, but it wasn't kind either. It carried that edge, soft on the surface, sharp underneath. Then came the flight attendant. Tall, blonde, crisp in her navy uniform. Her name tag read Angela. Her heels clicked as she moved down the aisle with the poise of someone used to controlling space. She smiled at the older couple in row 1, checked on a drink order in 3B, then stopped at 2. Her eyes narrowed just slightly. She tilted her head. "May I see your tickets again?" Lorna blinked. Of course. She reached into her purse and handed over the folded printouts. Angela examined them for longer than necessary, then looked up. "This is for 2A and 2C?" Correct, Lorna said. Is there a problem? Angela didn't answer right away. Her eyes darted from the tickets to Jalen, then back. These are first-class seats, she said flatly. Yes, Lorna replied, matching the flatness with measured calm. That's what we booked. Another pause. Another scan. Angela's lips pressed together. I'll verify with the gate, she said, and walked away without returning the tickets. Jalen exhaled slowly through his nose. He looked out the window, pretending he didn't hear, pretending he didn't feel. He didn't move. He didn't react. That was the rule. Don't feed the fire. Don't become the headline. Across the aisle, the man in the blazer watched with thinly veiled interest. He said nothing. Neither did the woman next to him. Behind them, a younger flight attendant, Chloe, stood by the galley wall. She had seen the interaction. Her eyes lingered for a moment, then shifted away. She didn't step forward. She didn't speak. Angela returned a minute later. We'll seat you for now, she said. But if there's any error on the manifest, we'll have to ask you to move. There's no error, Lorna said. Angela didn't respond. She handed back the tickets, turned, and left. A few minutes passed. Boarding continued. Passengers settled. Angela returned with a tray of drinks. She offered champagne to the woman in 1A, water to the man in 3C, skipped 2A and 2C without stopping. Not even a glance. Jalen didn't look up. Lorna watched her walk past, jaw set. She reached for the call button, hovered, then pulled her hand back. Let it go, she murmured to herself. Let it go. The announcement chimed overhead. The doors were closing. Flight attendants prepare for departure. Jalen finally took out his headphones. He didn't plug them in, just wore them. Noise canceling. Not just for sound, for everything else. Across the cabin, passengers reclined their seats, requested blankets, and adjusted footrests. The couple who had whispered earlier now avoided looking their way. The man with the blazer scrolled through stock quotes on his phone. Chloe, the young attendant, passed by once more, her steps slowing ever so slightly as she neared row 2. Her gaze landed on Jalen. Something flickered in her expression, but she said nothing. Then she kept walking. The engines roared to life. The cabin lights dimmed. The plane began to taxi. Jalen closed his eyes. He wasn't tired. He was preparing. Because this wasn't just a seat. It never had been. The plane had begun to crawl slowly away from the gate, the low hum of the engines creating a steady vibration beneath the cabin floor. First class remained cloaked in its quiet luxury, but the air had shifted. It wasn't turbulence, at least not the kind you could measure on instruments, but something far more human. Jalen sat motionless, his hood pushed back, his gaze fixed straight ahead. Lorna had adjusted her seat slightly, her fingers now laced across her lap, calm but vigilant. Angela, the lead flight attendant, returned up the aisle, this time without the drink tray. Her face remained composed, yet her movements were sharper now, more purposeful. She stopped abruptly at row 2, her eyes locked once more on Jalen and Lorna. I need to see your boarding passes again, she said, her tone clipped. Lorna blinked. I gave them to you already. Angela didn't flinch. I need to verify something. Lorna kept her voice even. No one else is being asked to verify. Angela's jaw tightened slightly. I'm not discussing this. May I see them again, or do I need to involve a captain? Jalen's body tensed. He said nothing, but his fingers curled slightly on the armrest. Lorna reached into her bag, her movements deliberate. We're not being difficult, she said, handing the passes back. But I do want to know why this is being asked of us, and only us. Angela glanced at the tickets briefly, then back at Lorna. I'm following procedure. Then show me the procedure, Lorna said, still calm, but her voice now edged with steel. Because I've flown before, and I know this isn't it. At that moment, Chloe, the younger attendant, appeared a few rows down, a tablet in her hands. She hesitated as she saw the scene unfolding. Her eyes met Angela's for a fraction of a second, and in that second, she understood everything. She knew the tension wasn't about security or protocol. It was something else, something she didn't want to name out loud. But she said nothing. Angela exhaled. "If there's an issue with their seating, I'll handle it." She snapped at no one in particular. She turned back to Lorna and added in a quieter, sharper tone, "If you're unwilling to comply, I'll have to request ground security meet us before takeoff. That's not what you want, is it?" Lorna stared at her for a long beat. The silence stretched. Jalen didn't move. Chloe still hadn't stepped in. "We've complied," Lorna said firmly. "Twice. And you're escalating something that never needed to be a conflict." Angela took a step back, folded the tickets, and returned them with a stiff motion. "Thank you for your cooperation," she said, then pivoted and walked briskly toward the galley. Chloe lingered for half a second longer, her mouth slightly open as if she might say something, then lowered her gaze and followed. In the seat across the aisle, the man in the blazer had stopped scrolling through his phone. He was listening. Others were too, though none looked directly. Lorna closed her eyes for a moment. Centering herself, Jalen shifted in his seat just slightly. "I didn't say anything," he murmured. "I know," Lorna replied. "And you didn't have to." The intercom dinged. A friendly male voice filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've been cleared for takeoff. Flight crew, please take your seats." Angela reappeared moments later, strapping herself into the jump seat at the front of first class. Her face remained a mask. Chloe sat across from her, but her eyes had lost their shine. The aircraft tilted upward. Jalen stared out the window again, but this time the clouds didn't distract him. His thoughts churned beneath his calm surface, and each moment Angela's voice echoed through the cabin for other passengers. His shoulders stiffened slightly, preparing for another confrontation that hadn't yet come. Lorna watched the attendants move through the aisle, her lips pressed together in the same way she did when she needed to keep from speaking the truth too soon. She didn't trust Angela, not after being questioned twice, not after the obvious exclusion with the drink service. She saw Chloe too, young, nervous, visibly uncomfortable now every time she glanced at their row. The girl knew. She just didn't know what to do with the knowing. A few more minutes passed. The flight attendants began another walkthrough with a first refreshment service. Angela led, Chloe followed. Angela reached the front of first class, where she paused and scanned the rows with a clipboard in hand. Her eyes stopped once again on Jalen. Something in her jaw twitched. She turned, walked briskly toward their row, and stopped, standing directly in front of the boy. "Excuse me," she said, her voice cool. Jalen slowly turned to face her, removing one ear cup. "Yes, ma'am." Angela narrowed her eyes. "You're not supposed to have your backpack at your feet during takeoff. That's a safety violation." Jalen glanced down. The bag was tucked neatly beneath the seat, not obstructing anything. "We already took off," he replied quietly. "It's not in the aisle." Lorna leaned in. "It's secured, ma'am. You saw that when we boarded." Angela took a half step closer, her shadow now crossing Jalen's chest. "That's not the point. You need to follow safety regulations without argument." Jalen looked up again, voice steady. "I'm not arguing. I'm just saying, I didn't do anything wrong." Those words stopped Angela cold. For half a second, her mask slipped. The corner of her lip twitched, and then it happened. Without warning, without a pause for thought, her hand lifted and struck Jalen across the face. The sound cracked through the cabin like the snap of a seatbelt unfastened in midair. Sharp, sudden, final. Jalen's head jerked slightly with the force of the blow. His cheek burned red instantly, and his body froze, not from pain, but from disbelief. Gasps erupted from three directions. One woman clutched the armrest in front of her. A man in 3A lowered his newspaper and blinked. Another passenger, a younger man in a denim jacket, pulled his phone out instinctively, fingers fumbling for the camera app as he tried to make sense of what he had just seen. Lorna stood up so fast her seat creaked. Her voice dropped low and fierce. "You did not just put your hands on this child." Angela didn't move. Her breathing had quickened, as though even she didn't understand what her hand had just done. "He was being disrespectful," she said, but it came out uneven, defensive. Jalen hadn't moved. He hadn't cried. He hadn't spoken. He just sat there, his fingers curled into his jeans, his face turned slightly. as if still waiting for the rest of the moment to arrive. The cabin remained frozen. Not a word from row 1. Not a sound from 3C or 3D. People watched, but no one acted. Except one. The young man with the phone had begun recording moments after the slap. He didn't say anything either, but he captured everything. The tilt of Angela's posture, the mark on Jalen's cheek, the expression on Lorna's face that now hovered somewhere between rage and heartbreak. Lorna took a breath and said, voice sharp now, I want the captain. Now. Angela turned slightly, but her words faltered. You're making a scene, she hissed. You think that wasn't? Lorna shot back. You just hit a child. In public. On camera. Don't you dare talk to me about scenes. Chloe stood at the curtain, frozen, her eyes wide and her hands clutching the hem of her blouse. She looked as though she might be sick. She didn't move forward. She didn't move at all. Jalen slowly turned his head back toward the aisle, eyes blinking as if still catching up with reality. His voice came low. I didn't do anything wrong. His tone wasn't angry. It wasn't pleading. It was broken. Like he had to remind himself more than he had to convince her. Angela, pale now, turned toward the front of the cabin. Stay in your seats, she said to no one in particular, then walked quickly toward the galley. No apology. No explanation. The cabin remained tense and silent. A few passengers leaned back in their seats, attempting invisibility. The couple in row 1 remained stiff and silent. The man who had questioned Jalen's presence earlier now looked down at his phone, pretending not to have seen what he had clearly seen. Lorna sat back down slowly, gently reaching over to touch Jalen's shoulder. I'm so sorry, baby, she whispered. Jalen's throat worked to swallow, but his face remained impassive. His fingers finally moved again, slow, careful, as he unlocked his phone and opened the messaging app. He typed just 4 words. She hit me. 2C. He didn't know what would come of the message, but he sent it. And the moment he did, something in his eyes changed. Not anger, not tears, but something more dangerous to anyone who had tried to silence him. The message had already left his phone. Short, simple, devastating. She hit me. C2C. Jalen didn't even look to see if it was delivered. He knew it was. His fingers, now steady despite the sting still spreading across his left cheek, slipped the phone back into his hoodie pocket with practiced ease. Beside him, Lorna hadn't stopped watching him, her hand still resting lightly on his shoulder, an anchor in the middle of the chaos. The cabin around them tried to return to normal, but normal didn't belong here anymore. Not after what had happened. Not after a child had been struck by a woman in uniform and no one said a word. Angela hadn't returned. Chloe had disappeared behind the curtain. The other passengers in first class sat frozen in that strange tension between guilt and distance. They shifted in their seats, opened magazines they wouldn't read, took sips from untouched glasses. Jalen leaned slightly against the window, but didn't look out this time. His breath was slow, intentional. Lorna finally reached for the call button. She pressed it. Nothing happened. She pressed again. After several seconds, a chime sounded, but no one came. In row 3, the man in the denim jacket who had filmed the slap took a quick glance around, then lowered his phone under his tray and typed something rapidly. In 1B, the woman who had muttered about wrong cabin earlier now shifted uncomfortably, stealing quick glances back toward Jalen, but never long enough to draw attention. Everyone had seen. Everyone had chosen silence. Now that silence was becoming suffocating. Jalen's phone buzzed once in his pocket. He pulled it out, read the screen. One message. One line. Are you safe? It was from a contact listed simply as DP. He typed back, I'm okay. She hit me. They're pretending nothing happened. Another buzz followed almost instantly. Do not move. Do not speak to her again. I'm on this flight. Jalen blinked. His eyes swept across the cabin instinctively, but nothing looked different. Everyone still sat where they were. No one stood. No one approached. But his father, Damian Price, was here, on board, somewhere nearby. And that changed everything. Lorna noticed the way Jalen's body shifted, the way he straightened his spine just slightly. "What is it?" she asked. Jalen handed her the phone. Her eyes scanned the message quickly, and her mouth opened just a fraction. She whispered, "He's here." Jalen nodded once. That was all. The message had been read. The right person had heard it. And now there would be consequences. 3 rows back, in 5D, Damian Price set his phone down on the armrest. He didn't need to type anything else. He didn't need to raise his voice. He had built his empire on knowing when to speak, and more importantly, when not to. His son had been struck in front of strangers, on his airline, by his employee, and that would not go unanswered. He pressed the seat call button. A chime echoed quietly. A junior flight attendant, not Chloe, emerged from a curtain. "Yes." "Sir?" she asked politely. Damian's voice was calm, but razor-sharp. "I need to speak to your captain immediately. Discreetly. No delays." The attendant blinked. She nodded. "Yes, of course." She disappeared. Damian didn't move. He sat with his legs crossed, one hand resting lightly over his knee, the other brushing non-existent lint from his jacket sleeve. In his silence, there was movement, power shifting beneath the surface. Ahead in the cabin, Chloe stepped forward again. She was pale, shaken. She made eye contact with Lorna from the galley entrance. There was apology in that glance, but it was wordless. Her feet didn't bring her forward. Her voice didn't reach out. Yet, Angela had returned to the front, standing near the curtain like a figure at a checkpoint. Her arms were crossed, and her face had hardened into something unreadable, cold, defensive, and rigid with denial. She didn't speak to Jalen, didn't acknowledge what had happened. In her mind, the moment had passed, but it hadn't. Not for Jalen, not for Lorna, and not for the man sitting 5 rows behind, watching every movement unfold. Jalen looked down at the phone again. New message. "Do not react to her. I will handle it." It didn't say when. It didn't say how. But Jalen didn't need more. He just needed to stay seated. Stay calm. He remembered his father's words from years ago. Words burned into memory like instructions for surviving a storm. When the world tries to erase you, you do not shout. You stay. You hold your seat. Because you belong in the storm as much as the ones who caused it. Lorna gave a quiet exhale. "He's not going to let this slide," she murmured. "Not after this." Jalen didn't reply. His fingers grazed the edge of the armrest. A quiet tremor passed through him. Anger, maybe. Or disbelief. Or the realization that what had happened wasn't a mistake. It was a decision. One Angela had made with full clarity, full power, and full confidence that no one would stop her. But someone had. Quietly. From just a few seats away, near the cockpit, the captain appeared in the galley, speaking with the junior flight attendant in hushed tones. After a moment, he nodded and stepped toward the first-class curtain. Angela turned, startled. "Captain?" she asked. He didn't answer her directly. He made his way past rows 1 and 2, paused at 5D, and leaned down. They exchanged a few words no one could hear. When the captain straightened again, his face was grave. He returned to the cockpit without a word. Angela watched it all, her eyes narrowing. She looked again toward row 2, but this time something in her expression faltered. Her confidence, once brimming, had started to crack. And though no one had publicly condemned her yet, she felt the shift. A pressure from the back. A silence that no longer protected her. Chloe took a step forward, then stopped. Jalen looked at her. For the first time, their eyes met fully. She held his gaze for just long enough to whisper, "I'm sorry," so faintly that only he and Lorna could hear. The silence didn't last long. It couldn't. The balance of power had shifted too far in the wrong direction, and nature, even within the sealed, pressurized world of an airplane, would not allow it to stay that way. The captain had returned to the cockpit, but the cabin remained tense, thick with questions unspoken, apologies unoffered, and one bruise that meant more than most people wanted to admit. Jalen sat like stone, calm on the outside, storm just beneath the skin. Lorna kept her hand close to his, not touching, not clinging, but present. A subtle reminder, "I'm still here." Chloe had backed into the galley again, her eyes wet but her voice trapped somewhere deep behind her throat. And Angela. Angela stood tall, still trying to hold the shape of authority, though her shoulders had started to slope ever so slightly, like a statue weathering against truth. Then he stood up, quietly, deliberately. 5 rows back, a man in a fitted charcoal suit rose from his seat with a kind of grace that didn't ask for permission. He wasn't rushed. He wasn't angry, at least not in the way most people understood rage. But there was power in his stillness, in the way people turned as he passed. At first, no one recognized him. Just another first-class passenger stretching his legs, maybe. But something in his walk silenced the whispers. Something in his presence made every person straighten in their seat, hold their breath, follow him with their eyes. Damian Price didn't need a name tag. His reputation had already boarded ahead of him. He stopped at row 2 and stood beside Angela, not looking at her right away, but letting the space between them speak first. Then, slowly, he turned to her. His voice, when it came, was low but crystalline. "You slapped my son." Angela's mouth opened, then closed. No sound. Nothing coherent formed. The entire cabin froze. Lorna sat up straight. Jalen blinked. Around them, heads turned. The man in the blazer leaned forward. The couple in 1A went wide-eyed. The woman who had whispered charity upgrade now stared openly. Damian tilted his head. "You didn't know, did you?" he continued, voice still calm. "You saw a black boy in a hoodie in seat 2C, and you assumed he didn't belong." Angela finally managed a sound. "Sir, I didn't realize—" "You didn't realize what?" he cut in, still not raising his voice. "That he was my son, or that you were wrong?" Angela's eyes flicked from Jalen to Lorna to Damian, then back again. "There was a misunderstanding," she tried. "I was enforcing safety protocols. No one else was slapped," Damian said, and this time his voice dropped half a tone, enough to freeze the air. "No one else was asked twice for their ticket. No one else was ignored for water. No one else was treated like a threat." Chloe, standing just inside the galley, put her hand over her mouth. She was shaking now. Damian turned slightly, just enough for the entire cabin to see his face clearly. That was when the whispers began. "Wait, that's Damian Price. The CEO, the guy who owns Skylinks. No way he's on this flight." Angela took a step back. "I didn't know." "Of course you didn't," Damian said. "Because you didn't ask. You assumed. That's the root of the issue. You didn't see him. You saw your idea of him. And that's why you thought you had the right to put your hands on my son." He didn't yell. He didn't curse. But each word hit sharper than any slap. Chloe stepped forward now, her voice trembling. "Sir, I saw it. I should have said something." Damian didn't turn to her. "And why didn't you?" She hesitated. I froze." "And what do you think Jalen did?" he asked, finally using his son's name. "He froze too. But he didn't strike. He didn't escalate. He didn't lash out. He sat there and absorbed the consequence of your silence and her judgment." Chloe's eyes welled up. Lorna stood slowly. "Mr. Price," she said quietly, "please don't blame her. She's young. She was scared. But she knows now. I saw it in her eyes." Damian nodded once. "Fear is human," he said, "but it cannot become policy." Then he looked back at Angela. "You don't work for me anymore." Angela's lips parted. "What?" "As of this moment," he said, "you are relieved of all duties. I've already notified ground control. You will be escorted off this aircraft upon landing." The woman in 3A gasped. The man who had filmed earlier sat up straighter. The video still played in his mind. The slap, the silence, the shift. "You're lucky," Damian continued, "that I'm handling this with professionalism. If I were simply a father, not your employer, we'd be having a very different conversation." Angela's face drained of color. She looked toward the front of the plane, then toward the curtain behind her, as if searching for escape. But there wasn't one. "You may go," Damian said, dismissing her with the calm finality of a gavel. Angela turned, her steps faltering. The aisle had never felt so narrow. She walked past rows of faces that once ignored her, now watching, some with judgment, others with something like relief. At the back of first class, she disappeared behind the curtain. Chloe remained standing. She didn't move, didn't follow. Damien turned to Lorna. "Are you okay?" Lorna nodded slowly. "We will be." He looked at Jalen next. For the first time, their eyes met directly. The boy didn't smile. He didn't speak, but his shoulders lowered slightly. Damien leaned closer and said just loud enough for him to hear, "You didn't do anything wrong. And now everyone knows it." Jalen nodded once. That was enough. Damien turned to the rest of the cabin. His voice didn't rise, but the room leaned in. "You all saw what happened. You all heard it. But no one stood up. No one said a word. Silence is easy, but it's also a choice." He let that sit. Let it cut. A few passengers dropped their gaze. The woman from 1A reached for her water glass, suddenly needing something to do with her hands. The man in the blazer looked out the window. No one argued. No one defended. The truth had landed before the plane ever would. Damien returned to his seat in row 5. He didn't look back again. Passengers sat straighter now, not out of pride, but out of awareness. The air had changed. Every breath carried weight. No one reached for their phones anymore. No one scrolled past what had happened. There were no distractions strong enough to ignore the echo left in the space where Angela had stood. Damien sat back in his seat, legs crossed, fingertips steepled lightly beneath his chin. He wasn't finished. Silence, once his greatest strength, had made its point. Now came the follow-through. He leaned forward and pressed the call button again. The same junior attendant returned, hesitant but composed. "Sir," she asked. Damien didn't look at her. "Get me the captain," he said evenly. "Tell him we need to speak now. Not after landing. Now." She nodded once, almost bowed, and hurried back toward the cockpit. Lorna turned to Jalen and whispered, "Breathe. This part is for you to watch." Jalen didn't speak. He simply nodded, his eyes never leaving the space ahead of him, where power had just changed hands without a single raised voice. Moments later, the captain emerged again, his uniform crisp, his posture alert, but his eyes now held recognition, not just of a passenger, but of someone who sat above his pay grade in every way. "Mr. Price," the captain said, "we're preparing for descent." "You'll make time," Damien said. He didn't stand. He simply gestured toward the nearest jump seat, and the captain understood. "Of course," he replied and sat. "Angela Dawson is suspended from all duties," Damien said plainly. "Effective immediately. She will not interact with another passenger for the remainder of this flight. That includes landing procedures." The captain gave a slow nod. "I understand. I'll inform the crew." "She will be escorted off the plane," Damien added, quietly, but visibly. "And I want security present at the gate." The captain's throat moved as he swallowed. "Security has already been requested." Damien glanced toward the front. "Good. Now I want documentation." "Documentation, sir?" "I want every flight attendant on this cabin crew to give a written statement before this flight ends," Damien said. "Not later. Not after lawyers review anything. I want their words as they remember them. Raw, honest, immediate." "Of course," the captain said again, though his voice was tighter now. "That includes Chloe," Damien added. Chloe blinked. She had inched closer, half listening, but now she froze. Her name struck like a bell. "Sir?" she asked cautiously. "You saw it," Damien said, turning his eyes to her for the first time. "You were standing right there. You heard the confrontation. You saw the slap. But you said nothing." Chloe's breath caught. I didn't know what to do." "I believe you," Damien said. "That's not the problem." She hesitated. "Then what is?" Damien's gaze didn't soften. "The problem is you chose silence. And silence is complicity. Not speaking doesn't protect victims. It protects those who do harm. And I expect better from people who wear the uniform I pay for." Chloe's eyes filled again. But this time she didn't look away. "I was afraid." "Then write that," Damien said. "But you will write it. Because you don't walk away from this pretending it didn't happen. None of us do." Chloe nodded slowly. "Yes, sir." Lorna gave a soft sigh beside Jalen, not out of frustration, out of respect, because this was what accountability looked like when it was done with clarity instead of vengeance. The captain rose again. "I'll see to the statements," he said. Damien nodded once. "Make sure they're signed. I want copies delivered to corporate and legal before this aircraft reaches the terminal." The captain left without another word. Chloe followed, slower. She passed Jalen's row, stopped briefly, and spoke just above a whisper. "I'm sorry," she said. "Not just for what happened, for not stopping it." Jalen looked at her. His cheek was still red, though the sting had dulled. "Are you sorry because of who I am?" he asked. She shook her head. "No," she said. "I'm sorry because I watched someone get hurt and stayed quiet. I let fear make me small." He held her eyes for a moment longer, then nodded once. That was all. Across the aisle, the man in the blazer shifted in his seat. He leaned forward. "Sir," he said, addressing Damien now, "I saw it happen too. I should have said something. I didn't." Damien looked at him. "Why didn't you?" "I assumed it wasn't my place," the man said. "I thought someone else would speak up." "And that's exactly what Angela thought too," Damien replied. "That no one would hold her accountable. That no one would challenge her." He paused. "That's how people like her get away with it for years." The man sat back, chastened. No excuse on his lips. Just shame. And maybe, beneath that, something useful. Resolve. A few seats away, a middle-aged woman cleared her throat. I was afraid of making it worse," she said. Her voice trembled. "I didn't know what to say." Damien turned slowly to face the cabin as a whole. "You don't need perfect words," he said. "You just need one. Stop." That one word changes everything. No one argued. No one deflected. Chloe returned minutes later with a clipboard in hand. She sat in an empty jump seat and began to write. Slowly, carefully. From her hands came ink, not just to fill a report, but to record the moment she chose to be more than a bystander. From the back of the plane, murmurs continued. Not gossip now. Reflection. Processing. One man quietly deleted the game he'd been playing on his tablet. Another closed his laptop entirely. A flight attendant who hadn't been involved leaned in to check on Jalen, offered him water. He declined politely. He didn't want comfort from those who had watched in silence. He didn't need sympathy. He needed them to change. Damien checked his watch. "How long until we land?" he asked Lorna. "About 20 minutes, she replied. "Good," he said. "Plenty of time for truth." A reckoning had been set in motion, not just in policy or consequence, but in conscience. The passengers of Flight 397 were no longer insulated travelers in first-class comfort. They were witnesses, and witnesses carry burden. Jalen remained seated, eyes forward, face calm. The mark on his cheek had darkened slightly, the edges of it now a reminder carved into flesh. Lorna sat with her hands folded in her lap, watching the cabin not with fear, but with resolve. Chloe, hunched over a clipboard in the galley, still scribbled in her rushed handwriting. A few feet away, Angela sat alone on the fold-down jump seat by the service station. Her uniform still neat, her posture tight, but her expression blank. Not angry, not apologetic, just hollow. The control she'd wielded all flight had collapsed inward, like a wave that realized too late it couldn't outrun the shore. Damien didn't speak anymore. He didn't need to. What he had said echoed through the silence, like a new pressure system inside the cabin. Across from Jalen, a middle-aged man in a gray pullover, the one who had previously whispered about upgrades and assumptions, finally stood. He cleared his throat once, twice, then turned slightly toward Jalen. His voice was low, shaky. "Young man," he started. Jalen looked at him without expression. "I saw it happen," the man continued. "From a moment you stepped on the plane. I saw the way she looked at you. I heard what she said. And when it escalated, I looked away." His voice cracked the edge. "I told myself it wasn't my business, that I shouldn't get involved. But it was. I should have said something. I should have done something. And I didn't. I'm sorry." Lorna's chin lifted slightly. She didn't smile. She didn't soften, but her eyes didn't harden either. It was the beginning of a recognition they hadn't expected, but deeply needed. Jalen gave the man a slow nod. That was all. Enough to say, "I heard you." Enough to say, "It's not erased, but it's seen." Behind the curtain, Chloe stepped into the aisle, her clipboard clutched tight to her chest. Her eyes were puffy now, cheeks blotchy, tears not yet dry. She walked with purpose, clumsy, quiet, but deliberate. She stopped beside Jalen's row. Then she spoke. "Can I sit?" she asked. Lorna nodded. Chloe crouched beside the aisle. She didn't look around to see who was watching. Everyone was watching. "I was there when it happened," she said. "You know that. I was standing just a few feet away. I could have stopped it. Maybe not the slap, but the moment before it. The words, the tone. I knew what she was doing. I felt it in my gut. But I froze. I let her take that moment from you. And I said nothing." Her voice shook, but she pushed forward. "I was scared. Scared of breaking rank. Scared of making things worse. Scared of Angela. But now I just feel ashamed. Because I didn't realize I was scared of the wrong person." Jalen looked at her quietly. Her hands trembled as they held the clipboard, her fingers tightening around it like she needed something to hold her steady. He didn't interrupt. He didn't rescue her from her truth. And in that silence, Chloe continued. "You didn't raise your voice. You didn't move. You just told her you hadn't done anything wrong. And she hit you anyway. And I let her walk away from it like it was just a moment to move past." She swallowed hard. But it wasn't. It was violence. And I was a part of it, because I didn't stop it. For a long second, no one said anything. Then Jalen, voice quiet but clear, replied, "But you see it now." Chloe blinked. "I do." "Then don't forget it," he said. "That's what matters next." Her eyes watered again. But this time she smiled, faint and broken. "I won't." Behind her, another passenger, an older woman with silver hair and a red scarf, cleared her throat. She didn't stand, but she leaned forward slightly in her seat. "I didn't say anything either," she admitted. "I saw her raise her hand. I heard the sound. But I told myself it wasn't my place." She paused. "It was cowardice. And that's on me." Lorna turned toward her. "It's not too late to decide who you are," she said simply. "But only if you mean it." The woman nodded, tears welling but not falling. "I do." And slowly, other voices joined. A businessman in 3C murmured, "I just watched." I kept scrolling like it wasn't happening next to me. A young woman in 2B whispered, "I saw your face when it happened. And I still didn't say anything. I told myself it would sort itself out." Another voice. Then another. Each admission softer than the last, but heavier. The plane became a confessional at 30,000 feet, descending slowly toward a city still unaware of the reckoning unfolding above it. And still, Jalen said very little. He listened. He heard them. But he didn't comfort them, because what they were carrying wasn't his to lighten. Damien, still seated in row 5, watched without speaking. He had engineered systems, restructured empires, overhauled policy across an entire industry. But this moment, this organic shift among strangers, required none of that. It required truth. And truth was speaking now in voices that had once chosen silence. Chloe stood. She turned toward the rest of the cabin. "There's a reason this happened," she said. "It's not just about me, or him, or Angela. It's about how easily we look away. How fast we decide who belongs and who doesn't." No one interrupted her. No one rolled their eyes. She went on. "We were all part of what happened. We all let it go too far. But that doesn't mean we have to let it stay that way." She turned back to Jalen. "Thank you for staying seated." He nodded. "Thank you for finally standing." The plane hit a patch of light turbulence. It passed quickly. But it was enough to shake everyone from their introspection for a moment. The intercom chimed. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing in approximately 10 minutes. Please ensure your seat belts are fastened and tray tables stowed." People moved, slowly, mechanically. But something had changed in their movements. No one rushed. No one ignored. They moved like people who were waking up. Angela hadn't said a word since being removed. She sat stiff in the back, staring ahead, her hands clasped tightly. She had heard it all, every word, and for the first time, perhaps, she couldn't argue with any of it. The weight of it wasn't in the punishment, it was in the exposure, in knowing that the story would outlive the flight. Chloe handed the clipboard to the captain as he walked by. He took it with a nod. "Statement complete," she said, "and unedited." He glanced at the pages, then at her. "Takes courage." "No," she replied. "It takes regret. Courage comes later." And when she walked past Jalen's row again, she didn't avoid eye contact. She looked right at him. This time, not as a staff member, not as someone above him, just human. The wheels lowered. The city stretched out beneath them. Lights flickered in grids. Cars streamed through evening traffic. But inside the cabin, everyone's focus remained not on arrival, but on what they would carry off this flight that hadn't come with them when they boarded. The chime signaled arrival. "Welcome to Seattle," the captain's voice echoed calmly. "Please remain seated until the seatbelt sign has been turned off. Ground crew will assist shortly." But no one moved. The silence that had overtaken first class earlier didn't fade with descent. It matured, hardened, took root. People shifted in their seats slowly, deliberately, unsure how to behave in a world where denial no longer had altitude to hide behind. Damien remained seated in 5D, calm and unreadable. Jalen sat forward now, his hands resting on his knees, his backpack zipped and ready but untouched. The bruise on his cheek had faded from red to shadowed purple. It looked like healing, but it hadn't yet. Lorna sat beside him like stone, her purse in her lap, her shoulders relaxed, but her mind still moving, still protecting. A minute passed. Then two. Chloe stood at the galley entrance with her arms crossed, her clipboard already submitted, her eyes fixed on the back of the cabin where Angela still sat, rigid, waiting. She hadn't spoken since being relieved. She hadn't looked anyone in the eye. She hadn't even removed her gloves. And now, as the engines wound down and the last stretch of the flight played out in real time, it was her turn to stand. A soft knock on the cockpit door. The captain stepped out and nodded to the two uniformed officers, standing just outside the cockpit curtain. Airport security. Silent. Professional. Present. The curtain pulled back. Passengers turned to look but didn't speak. No one gasped. No one moved to film. They had already seen enough. The officers walked down the aisle with practiced ease. They stopped at Angela's row, one of them bending slightly. "MS. Dawson," he said simply. She didn't argue. She didn't plead. She stood up slowly, her limbs stiff like a doll on strings. She took a step, then another, following them down the aisle toward the front of the plane. The walk felt longer than any runway. Every step echoed in the hush of passengers who had all watched her at her highest and were now seeing her at her lowest. When she reached the front of the cabin, she paused, turned. Her eyes found Jalen's. She opened her mouth. The words came out barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry." Jalen didn't blink, didn't speak, didn't nod. His silence was no longer a weapon or a shield. It was the final verdict. Angela turned back toward the open door, where flashes of cameras were already firing from beyond the glass tunnel. Reporters, photographers, microphones ready. Her breath hitched once, and then she stepped out, escorted but not dragged, visible but no longer powerful. The door shut behind her. The cabin remained quiet. Damien finally stood. He didn't say anything to the other passengers. He adjusted his jacket, stepped into the aisle, and walked to the front of the plane. A junior flight attendant tried to hand him a prepared statement. He shook his head. Outside, the cameras caught him in crisp resolution. They surrounded the gate, capturing his calm stride, his unreadable face, the boy just behind him, and the woman at his side. But when they shouted for a comment, all he gave them was this: "They'll learn something from the silence today." Then he kept walking. Jalen didn't look at the cameras. He didn't wave. He didn't flinch. He followed his father like gravity followed the earth, steady, silent, and seen. Inside the terminal, a black car waited, tinted, discreet. Lorna opened the back door and helped Jalen in first. Damien followed, closing the door behind them. As the vehicle pulled away from the curb, Lorna finally broke the silence. "You okay?" she asked softly. Jalen stared out the window. "I'm still figuring that out." Damien glanced at him in the reflection of the glass. "You don't have to have answers yet," he said. "You just have to know you weren't the question." Jalen nodded. The city moved past them in streaks of light and motion. Back at the gate, passengers finally began to disembark. But they didn't rush. They didn't shove or crowd the aisle. They exited like people who had witnessed something irreversible. Chloe remained near the door, thanking them quietly, her voice softer than when they boarded. She didn't smile. She didn't pretend. She looked each one in the eye. In row 2, the woman who had once whispered about seat upgrade stopped. She turned back to Jalen's empty seat, then to Chloe. "Tell him," she began. "Just tell him I saw it. Eventually. And I wish I'd seen it sooner." Chloe didn't promise to pass on the message. She just nodded, because some words weren't meant to be relayed. They were meant to live in the speaker's own soul. In the cockpit, the captain signed off on the flight report. He included everything, not just times and turbulence, but testimony. He added a final line under remarks: "Incident occurred. Addressed in flight. Accountability enforced." Meanwhile, in the airport conference room near the gate, Angela sat alone, hands folded, uniform jacket removed. She stared at the floor as a senior airline official entered and laid a printed document in front of her. "You'll have an opportunity to respond," the woman said. Angela didn't respond. Her mouth was dry. Her throat ached. She was no longer rehearsing a defense. She was reckoning with the moment her instincts became her indictment. "I didn't mean to," she started. The official held up a hand. "You don't need to explain right now." Angela looked up. He didn't raise his voice. Not once. "And she couldn't finish the sentence. The official closed the folder. "Intent doesn't erase harm," she said. "And silence doesn't erase responsibility." Across town, in the back of a quiet car, Jalen pulled the boarding pass from his pocket. It was creased now, bent at the corner. He smoothed it out against his knee and stared at the seat number. 2C. A number, a letter. But now something more. A memory. A statement. A scar. Damien noticed. "You keeping that?" he asked. Jalen nodded. "Yeah, I think I should." "Good," Damien said. "But not as a reminder of what happened to you. As a reminder of what you refused to become." They didn't speak for a while after that. The silence wasn't heavy. It was complete. Back at the airport, the final passengers exited the gate. One man lingered. He turned to Chloe before stepping into the terminal. "Thank you," he said, "for admitting it, for writing it down." Chloe met his eyes. "It was overdue." "Yeah," the man replied. "It was." And then he walked out, joining the flow of a city that hadn't changed, but had just been told it needed to. In the car, Jalen leaned back against the seat. His cheek still throbbed, but differently now. Not from pain, from remembrance. "What happens now?" he asked. Damien looked out the window. "Now we make sure this doesn't disappear." The car turned left. The sun dipped behind the skyline. By the time Jalen and Damien reached the driveway of their private residence, the footage had already made its way into inboxes and newsrooms, social media feeds, and morning briefings. No dramatic headlines. No outlandish graphics. Just a boy, a hand, a cabin frozen in silence, and the moment that rewrote how the world saw first class. Jalen didn't check the news. He didn't open the articles that kept pinging his phone. He didn't need to. He had lived it, and the memory was more vivid than any angle a lens could capture. But the world was watching now, and watching carefully. Damien knew it too. The next morning, he arrived at Skylink's headquarters earlier than usual. His office overlooked the city, all glass and steel, the skyline a blur behind layers of planning and leadership. Normally, the mornings began with performance reports and market projections. But today, the first item on the agenda was internal accountability. In a conference room on the 15th floor, Damien sat across from his executive team. Legal counsel, HR leads, training directors, and corporate affairs. His voice didn't rise. His tone didn't shift, but the message was unequivocal. "This isn't a PR crisis," he said. "This is a systemic failure. And we don't fix systems with statements. We fix them with structure." The HR director nodded slowly. "We've drafted a full protocol overhaul. It includes extended training, incident reporting, real-time accountability measures." Damien didn't blink. "It's not enough." The room went still. "I want this program rebuilt from scratch," he continued. "Not updated. Rebuilt. It will be mandatory. It will be specific. And it will carry the name of the boy your silence almost buried." "You mean your son?" one executive asked. Damien looked directly at him. "No, I mean the boy in C2C. Because it shouldn't take being my son to be treated like you belong." The table nodded. No one objected. No one tried to soften the truth. Within 48 hours, the airline issued a press release. No excuses. No vague commitments. Just action. Introducing the 2C Initiative. It read, "A company-wide training and reform program designed to eliminate implicit bias, elevate accountability, and redefine what it means to serve all passengers with equal dignity." The language was clear, firm, transparent. The press praised it. But Damien didn't care about praise. He cared about permanence. Every new hire would be trained under the 2C Initiative. Every current employee, from flight crew to management, would complete the same certification. Refusal to comply would result in termination. There were no exceptions. Chloe was the first to complete the training. She sat in a small, quiet conference room at the training center, surrounded by screens, reflection prompts, real-world case simulations. She didn't flinch when Jalen's story came up in the examples. She didn't look away when the video played. She watched herself, frozen in the frame, motionless while a child was struck. When the final module ended, she didn't exhale with relief. She just signed her name. A few words were handwritten below the signature. "I don't want to forget what it felt like to stay quiet." Across the city, Angela sat at her kitchen table. Her uniform had been folded and stored in a box weeks ago. She hadn't worn it since the flight. She hadn't reapplied for another job. She hadn't answered most calls. She had written several apology emails in draft, each one revised, deleted, rewritten. None felt like enough. Until this one. She stared at the screen for almost an hour before pressing send. It went to a private address. Jalen's direct inbox. The subject line read, "Not to ask for forgiveness, but to face what I did." The body of the email was short, thoughtful, clear. She wrote, "You don't know me, and I didn't know you. I thought I did when I looked at you and made up my mind about who you were. I told myself it was protocol. But the truth is, I reacted to a story I invented inside my own bias. I didn't treat you like a child. I didn't treat you like a passenger. I treated you like a threat. And when you didn't respond the way I expected, when you were quiet, I made it worse. I hit you. I didn't apologize then because I didn't understand the full shape of what I had done. I still don't know if I do. But I know this. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm asking to see myself clearly, maybe for the first time. And for that clarity, I owe you more than I can write. Angela Dawson." When Jalen received the message, he didn't respond. Not because he was angry. Not because he wanted her to suffer in silence. But because he understood now, some apologies are meant to sit quietly. Not to be acknowledged, but to be carried. At school, students whispered less. The ones who stared before now looked him in the eyes when they passed. Some nodded, some didn't. But the difference was clear. He wasn't a story anymore. He was someone they saw. During homeroom, the principal stepped into the classroom, handed Jalen a sealed envelope, and said, "You've been invited to speak." The event, a student-led panel on respect, identity, and the power of presence. Jalen didn't say yes right away. He carried the envelope in his backpack for a day and a half. Then he opened it, and he wrote one line in return, "I'll speak, but only if I can be honest." Meanwhile, in the training center, instructors printed new posters. They weren't stock images or empty slogans. They were quotes from the testimony of passengers aboard Flight 397. One of them read, "I watched and said nothing. I'll never do that again." Another, "He didn't need to prove anything. We just needed to see him." And beneath those quotes, in bold, clear letters, the name of the program, the 2C Initiative. Not just a policy, a reminder. In every crew room, in every training packet, in every onboarding folder, those three characters, 2C, carried a story that wouldn't be sanitized. Time passed, but what happened on Flight 397 never truly landed. Even as the news cycle shifted, even as other headlines took its place, the echo of that moment continued to ripple. Not loud, not viral, but constant, like a heartbeat beneath the surface of a culture being quietly rewired. Jalen didn't seek the spotlight. He didn't attend press events. He didn't do interviews. Despite the offers that flooded in from journalists, activists, even talk show producers wanting the brave boy from 2C to appear on camera, he declined them all. Because he wasn't interested in becoming a symbol. He was interested in becoming whole. At school, life found a new rhythm. It wasn't normal, it couldn't be, but it was honest. Students still stared sometimes, still whispered, but less with curiosity now and more with a sense of quiet respect. A few even apologized in hallways, awkwardly, sincerely, not because they had said anything offensive, but because they hadn't said anything at all when it mattered. Jalen never held it over them. He just nodded. He understood that silence, now more than ever. One morning, a letter arrived. Not an email, not a message or a tag post. A real envelope, with handwriting on the front, shaky, careful, deliberate. The return address was unfamiliar. He opened it slowly. Inside was a folded page and a printed photo. The note read, "Jalen, we sat 2 rows apart. I was in 4. I saw everything. I heard the slap. I watched you not react. I watched you hold yourself still when most grown men I know would have exploded. And I did nothing. I stayed quiet. I told myself it wasn't my place. I convinced myself that someone else would speak up, that maybe it wasn't as bad as it felt. But when your father stood and said what he said, it was like a mirror cracked in front of all of us. I've thought about that moment every day since, about the sound of her hand, about the sound of your silence, and how somehow your quiet was the loudest thing in the room. You made me face myself, not with shame, but with truth. And I don't know if I'll ever get to tell you that in person, but this is me trying anyway. You didn't just hold your seat. You held a mirror to everyone who didn't. Thank you. T.R. The photo was of seat 2C. Empty. Clean. Just a wide leather chair in the front of an airplane cabin. But to Jalen, it looked like the moment everything changed. He sat with the letter for a long time before showing it to his dad. Damien read it without a word. Then he folded it neatly, placed it on Jalen's desk, and said, "Keep it." Later that evening, Jalen did something he hadn't told anyone he was planning. He went to the storage drawer beneath his bed and pulled out the small glass shadow box his father had once given him for storing keepsakes. Old science medals, school trip tickets, things that felt important but not sacred. He opened it, removed everything, and carefully placed the original boarding pass from Flight 397 inside. It had creases and fingerprints and the faint ghost of a fold line across the middle, but it was still legible. Seat 2C. He centered it, pressed it flat, and just above it he added a plaque, a small strip of brushed metal. On it, etched in his father's handwriting, were the words, "Hold your seat." Not because it's first class, but because you always belonged in it. He closed the box, locked it, set it on the highest shelf in his room. And he didn't look at it again, not because he wanted to forget, but because he finally didn't have to stare at it to remember. He carried it with him now. The lesson, the weight, the dignity. Chloe continued working flights. Not as the same person, though. Passengers noticed it. Her tone changed. Her posture. She no longer defaulted to power or procedure. She led with presence. Once, a teenage boy who looked like Jalen boarded a flight, nervous and alone, holding his ticket tight. Chloe greeted him with a smile, walked him to his seat personally, and said, "You belong here. Don't let anyone make you doubt that. She didn't tell him why she said it. She just made sure he felt it. The 2C initiative expanded across the airline. Employees began referring to tough conversations during training as 2C moments. Captains brought it up in pre-flight briefings. New hires asked what it meant, and they were told the story. Not the PR version, the real one. Jalen's name wasn't always mentioned, but his impact was. Damien continued overseeing the rollout, but he stayed out of the public eye. When asked to comment, he always declined with a simple response: "The story isn't mine to own. It's the world's to learn from." Back at school, Jalen received another invitation, this time to a youth leadership conference. They wanted him to speak, not about race, not about policy, about resilience, about what it meant to stay standing in the middle of something unjust without letting it define who you become. This time, he said yes. Not because he wanted the stage, but because he finally understood the weight of being heard. When he walked onto the auditorium stage that weekend, dressed in his usual hoodie, jeans, and quiet strength, the applause came not for fame, but for presence. He stepped up to the microphone, cleared his throat, and began with this: "I didn't want to be brave. I just didn't want to disappear." He told the story. All of it. Not the version people wanted to hear. The real one. With the fear, with the shame, with the ache of being judged by strangers, and the power of not shrinking because of it. He didn't cry. He didn't preach. He just told the truth. And afterward, when the line formed, students, teachers, adults, he shook their hands and listened to their own stories of silence and courage and regret. One girl, maybe 11, handed him a sticky note that simply said, "You helped me speak louder," without yelling. He kept it. And when he got home, he placed it next to the shadow box. The two artifacts lived side by side now. The seat he never left. The voice he never raised. Both reminders of a truth the world finally had to learn the hard way. That power isn't in the uniform, or the tone, or the title. It's in the choice to see someone clearly before deciding who they are. And as long as that truth lived in him, Jalen would never have to raise his voice to be heard again. The end. If this story moved you, don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss the next one. Which part of the story hit you the hardest? Was it the silence, the slap, or the moment the truth came out? And where in the world are you watching from today? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts.